Okay, well, welcome to my presentation, Plone Dev 101 for Djangonauts. So just firstly, an introduction to myself. My name's Tim Knapp. I'm a web developer, Python web developer. I've stumbled across Python just over 7 years ago when I discovered Plone and started developing content management system-based websites in Plone. And since then, recently, I've been looking a bit more into using repose.bfg, which has become essentially Pylons 2.0 in recent times, and also just doing a bit of Django as well. So just keep in mind this presentation is an introduction to Plone with some Django comparison points thrown in. So it's taken from more of a Plone developer's perspective. So if there's any Djangonauts in the room and I'm saying something that's completely wrong or I say something not too clear, please feel free to pipe up and let me know that. Just not all at once, please. So can I just get an idea of who are Djangonauts or Django developers in the room? Let's get a feel for the audience. Cool. And yeah, Jacob, obviously. Yeah. Great. Okay, so first of all, why choose... actually, just to give you an overview of what I'm going to be discussing today. So we're going to be looking at how data is stored in Plone and Django, creating and modifying data in Plone and Django, views in Plone and Django, and also templating in Plone and Django. So first of all, why choose Plone in your next web project? Well, Plone is an enterprise content management system, and as such, it supports content authoring, workflow, archiving, accessibility, indexing, searching, internationalization, aggregation, etc. So because it's so feature-rich, it means that the learning curve for Plone can be quite steep. But there's an excellent community behind the project, the Plone project, and there's also extensive documentation to help you out as well. The database that Zope uses is the Zope Object Database, or the ZOB, and that's natively stores Python objects. There's no mapping of fields or synchronizing of fields to the database. It just works. You just save your object into the database and it's just native Python objects that can be attribute accessed and everything. Also, you can just throw any type of content at the database and it'll just store it. Again, it just works. It also has granular, this is the ZOB, it also has granular role-based security baked in. So there's no need to modify the classes or the templates in order to provide security to those. It's something that you can do at the database level, and again, it just works, that security model. Okay, so why choose Django for your next web project? Well, Django is a web framework. It provides the building blocks for building your next web application from the ground up. And because it's lightweight, it means that it's very easy for developers to get up to speed and productive in the framework in a short amount of time. Again, it also has a great set of documentation behind it and an excellent community. It's also very good for working with heavily relational data because it has this nice object-oriented layer that sits on top of SQL. The roles and permissions inside Django are done at the code and the template layer via Django's authorization and authentication system. So how's data stored in Plone? Well, it's done by subclassing what they call the Archetypes base classes that are inside Plone. And these base classes, when you subclass them, they ensure that the objects that you're saving, they persist in the Zope Object Database, that they have the core set of Dublin metadata and many other things that are thrown in because you're using that base class. I'll just give you a bit of I'll just show you what I'm talking about when I'm talking about subclassing an Archetypes base class. You just have to bear with me as I open up Eclipse. So this is a, actually I should probably just change that font size. Okay, so here, when I'm creating my Archetypes class, I'm subclassing this class here, which basically this class has got all those things that help it to work within the Zope object database. So it provides the persistence, security, searchability, indexing ability, however you want to call it. So just by subclassing that particular class, I get all that baked in. You can also select folderish archetypes. So that particular one that I'm subclassing there is just a standard, object that can be saved into the Zope object database. But you can actually choose folderish ones too, which enable you to put sub-objects, save sub-objects within your class as well. In Plone, the schema is also part of the Archetypes base class. So you'd put your fields and the associated properties of those fields within the Archetypes class that you're creating. And again, I'll give you a look at that now. You probably saw it when I was scrolling down before some of the fields and things that I was creating. So here's my schema. So I'm creating a computed field here, a string field. There's a whole range of these fields that you can select to apply to your schema. And you can see some of the properties that I'm assigning to these fields. I'm saying this field's required, it's searchable. This is the widget that it's using. It's a multi-selection widget, and the label that appears on that widget is that label and things like that. And when I create the class down here, you notice there's the schema attribute. So I just put schema equals, and that's the schema that I created above that held those fields and properties associated with those fields. Okay, so how does this compare with Django? Well, in Django, Python objects are mapped to tables and columns in your database. And this is done by the Django object relational mapper. So you just subclass the Django.db.models.model class, and that enables that model that you've created to be able to interact with the database, and you can add any fields to that. So I'll just show that class name. For some of you, it's probably quite obvious stuff, but I'll just put that up there. So it's nice and simple to create your models inside the Django or inside your database. Okay, so now creating new content inside your Plone site. Well, once you've created that Archetypes class that I showed you before, then you register that class with what's called the Plone Types tool. Now, showing you how to register it with the Plone Types tool is beyond the scope of this presentation. But once you do that, then you can create or add content into the Plone site via the Plone UI. You can also programmatically create content in your site by using this method here. So you can call that method at any point within the Zope object database, pass it in the ID that it's when you want to access that object, this is the ID you use, and also give it a title. Those are the two required attributes or two required keywords for that method that you pass in to create content in the database. Okay, so how do you get at your data in Plone once you've created it? Well, once when you create your Archetypes class, you execute this call, and when you run that particular method, it automatically creates getters and setters on your objects or on the fields within your objects. And I'll show you that now. So you can see me make the call. You see at the bottom there, I make that call to that register type method. I pass it in my class name that I created above, and then it's just this is just a constant defined in my project. It's just the project name. So in this case, I think it's emerge.farmOpportunity. So once I do that, it automatically creates these getters and setters on all the fields, so I can actually set data on the fields, or I can modify data. And the format for the getters and setters is that. So if I had a field name title, once I register that class via that method call I showed you before, then it will say get title will be the way. If I want to get the data out of my object, it will say get title, and then if I want to set data to the title, it will be set title. So whatever your field name is, it just capitalizes the first letter of the field name, and you can go get field name and set field name to change data. Okay. Now, what about Django? Well, new objects can be created in the database by calling the Django model name that you created and passing field values to that model name as keywords. And then when you call the save method after you've created that instance of your model, that will save that data to the database. Objects can be accessed by way of your model name.objects to get a listing of the instances of those objects you've created in the database. And again, they can be updated by just changing the field attribute names that are returned when you get that data back. And then again, once you've changed the data or modified it, just calling the save on it will save the data back to the database. And I'll show you that now. Hang on a sec. My memory-hungry Eclipse. This is actually the Kiwi PyCon site code, if you're curious. So you can see here that for all instances of this user profile model, we just grab all of them by way of this objects method that's hanging off of those models. And that'll get us all the list of them. Okay, so views in Plone. So a view in Plone or in Django is essentially just a class or a function that takes data from the browser, from the web browser, and returns some response or some data back to the web browser after it's processed it. So the building blocks for a Plone view are made up of a Python class, which inherits from something called products.5.browserView, an optional interface, an optional template to render the view, and an XML-like configuration language called ZCML, which ties together the template, the security options, the view name, and the view class and interface. So again, I'll show you that.